Good afternoon. This is Katie Friedman from Unitrends. I'd like to welcome you to our live session on creating your backup and recovery checklist for 2016. Before we begin today, I did want to give you a couple of housekeeping notes. As you may have already noticed, we do have all attendees in listen-only mode. With this in mind, we do welcome your questions throughout today's presentation. However, we do ask that you utilize the Q&A functionality from the WebEx Toolkit, which you will find by selecting the icon with a question mark from the drop-down menu near the middle top of your screen if you have that view, or from the upper right-hand corner of your screen if you have that view. Please make sure to address all questions to all panelists so that we can answer your questions as quickly as possible. With those details taken care of, I did want to go ahead and introduce our presenter for today. Today we have Mike Meglio, Director of Project Marketing here at Unitrends. Mike?
A kind introduction and housekeeping. Welcome everybody to today's webinar. I truly appreciate your time and I respect that. I know that it's valuable and I understand how difficult it is to allocate time for live webinars. So thank you for that. And I look forward to you walking away today with some key information that will help you in building or tuning your data and application recovery plans as you move into 2016 and beyond. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So as we move into the new year, it's really a natural time for resolutions, right? We probably all have already broken all of our resolutions. I know I have. But it's a good time to take stock in business continuity and recovery assets and take a look at them and evaluate what needs that you need to improve in 2016 and beyond. So today we're going to look at some of the things that I think are top backup and recovery trends for 2016. We'll take a really brief look at the price an organization will pay for not having a DR plan in place, really ultimately the cost-benefit introduction to that. We'll look at a checklist for starting your 2016 plan out on the right path and what the best path is or what the best way is to stay on track and minimize those costs. And then for those that aren't familiar with Unitrends, I'll give you a really brief overview of who Unitrends is. And of course, as Katie said, I'll make sure we have time for Q&A. And it's really impossible to do justice to this subject in the 40 minutes or so that I'll speak. So everything that I'm talking about today is covered in a more detailed white paper. You'll get a copy of that along with the recording after today's session. So to start with, let's take a really brief look at what happened in 2015 in the backup and recovery market in particular. So it's important to understand where we came from before we look at some of the trends. So nearly a third of the organizations use cloud storage services of some sort, right? This is a survey that was done by Storage Tech. It's an online magazine, if you will. It's a company that writes in storage magazine. Most of those are online. It used to be in my day, in previous days, it was a paper magazine, but today it's online. And they track and look at this and talk to analysts and vendors and really have a very good handle. And this is their perspective that was written in December of 2015, so it's relatively new. And again, 30% are using cloud storage, and 44% of the companies that they surveyed, and it was a fairly large survey of well over a couple thousand companies that they talked to, are looking to either start up a new storage plan, cloud storage implementation, or expand the one that they had. Understandably, backup was 60% of the primary applications for cloud storage today. You know, I won't talk about that in any great detail, but we can certainly talk about that offline or in another webinar. The interesting thing is that the fastest growing use cases for the cloud in 2015, and you'll see this move into 2016 as well, are disaster recovery at 35% of the users, and archive, or long-term retention. This is primarily due to compliance and regulatory requirements and the need to store data for long periods of time. And then lastly, and most interesting out of this 2015 survey is that 54% of the organizations that are planning on going to cloud are planning to do that in a hybrid method, and that means storing the data both on-premise in their primary data center or their primary site for immediate recovery, as well as in the cloud for either long-term backup, long-term retention and archive, or for disaster recovery. So the concerns, can continue to be a challenge in the cloud storage adoption market, and they include things like security, and a lot of these everybody on the phone I think will have a fairly good sense for, right? But security, 54% of the companies saying that they're worried about how data is handled and managed in the cloud. 33% are concerned about the cost of cloud storage capacity, and this is mainly a result of those archive requirements, those long-term data retention requirements, and the growth of cloud storage, and how a lot of particularly hyperscale or public cloud companies, the ones that you're typically familiar with, the Amazons, the Googles, and so forth, and not speaking poorly about them because we support them all. The bigger your storage pool, the higher the cost tends to be, and it grows. It's not a typical archive retention policy where you only keep certain copies of it. And again, we can talk about that on another webinar. 25% are concerned about network and transaction fees, because in those instances, in a lot of instances, there are fees for accessing your data or the network attached to it. And most surprising to me, actually, is that only 19% are worried about bandwidth issues, which is a significant issue to me for the cloud. You need to make sure that you optimize your WAN and optimize your bandwidth. And just a mere 15% have anxieties about service uptime. So what happens if the cloud goes down, right? You need to have a cloud-to-cloud or some other type of backup or assurance that if that primary site cloud goes down, that you have a secondary site cloud that continues to operate and has your data associated with it. So those are issues that we'll see as we move into 2016. So the trends, as we look at 2016, clearly we can see from that review that I just did that there's a strong desire to incorporate cloud, not only for backup storage, but for long-term retention to meet compliance requirements, and more importantly, for disaster recovery and business continuity in that environment in the event that you have a primary outage at your primary site. So clearly in 2016, the exception that all company data and applications will be available at all times from the expectation really is that all company data and the applications, right? It's not just data, but the applications, those mission-critical primary applications, will need to be available at all times from any location and any device. And that's really the direction we're moving into. I think all IT people on the phone here today will likely agree with that perspective. So with these growing challenges and expectations, really sorting out what are the real trends, right? Because everybody's writing about them, everybody's talking about them. And sorting those out from the real trends and what the noise is, it sometimes can be confusing. So let's take a look at some of the trends that will affect disaster recovery and business continuity in 2016. I'm not really looking broadly across the entire cloud and cloud computing market space. I'm really focused narrowly at how is that going to grow and how is that going to change for disaster recovery and business continuity and long-term data retention. So the first thing is that the choice of cloud backup and recovery cloud choices will continue to grow. I mean, we have a lot of them today that continue to grow. And with that, the cost of per gigabyte will be continued to go down. So in that low cost per month that is associated with some hyperscale cloud providers may look like the most affordable option for all companies. So that's the right way to go. And for some companies, it is the right choice. I mean, if you don't have a lot of data, you don't have a lot of compliance requirements, you don't need to recover in the cloud, your business continuity or application isn't as so critical or customer facing that it needs to spin up very, very quickly. You know, some companies don't have those level of requirements, and a hyperscale cloud is a good low-cost option for a lot of those types of solutions. It's also a good low-cost option for storing archives, for storing backup, and that's why you'll see companies like Unitrends that support both the hyperscale cloud environment as well as our own cloud environment where we provide additional services. So my caution here really is to do your homework, you know, to look at what those total costs are, the network egress fees, the data retrieval costs, the compounding storage that may be associated with long-term retention, and additional factors as to how quickly you can get your data back in the event of a failure, and can you recover within the cloud itself. So when you look at hyperscale clouds today, continuing operation within the cloud in the event of an outage is somewhat difficult today because migrating the data and applications to that cloud environment continues to be a challenge. So moving VMware to AWS as an example isn't easy to do. It's becoming easier, and things like Boomerang, which Unitrends provides, does that transparently so that you can move those applications in there. And you'll see that continuing to change as you move into 2017. But just be aware and look at the cloud options that are out there and make sure they fit whatever your particular need happens to be. While 2015, a lot of the survey people didn't believe that bandwidth is an issue, but it will continue to be a concern, and it will persist as we move into 2016. And the primary reason for this, again, is storage growth continues unabated, right? It's growing at an average of 40% per year, even more than that for some, less for others. But there's more data than ever to back up. But however, wide area networks are continuing to grow as well, but this will continue to be a challenge as we move data into the cloud. So to address this, you're starting to see more WAN acceleration, more WAN optimization. So ensure when you move into that cloud environment, particularly for business continuity and disaster recovery, that you're implementing good WAN optimization, good WAN acceleration, things like deduplication, things like compression, things like inline deduplication and deduplication on the fly and replication immediately after the data is backed up. Those types of applications are being integrated into the on-premise backup and recovery solutions and automatically managing and sending that to the cloud. And you'll see more of that. The other thing that's available from some companies, and it's important to take a look at this depending on the size of the data set that you have, is seeding, both seeding of the initial data set to the cloud, and that's just basically putting it on disk or tape and sending it to the cloud provider so that you don't have to send all that initial, because deduplication obviously doesn't work. There's none on the cloud, right? So you have to send your entire data set there to begin with, and then you can incrementally send just the delta differences in the future. So seeding is important if you have a large data set to get it there, but it's more important, really think about it, and this is something that a lot of people don't talk about or ask, is how do you get that data back in the event you have a catastrophic failure at your primary site, right? If you have a significant outage, you're continuing your business and business continuity in the cloud, a good thing, right? Disaster recovery, recovery assurance, business continuity in the cloud, your mission critical applications are continuing to operate, you're continuing to back up that data, plus all the original long-term retention that you had there to begin with, could be terabytes of data. How do you get it back to your primary site? So reverse seeding, again, putting on disk or tape, sending it back overnight to your facility and putting it back into your new servers and so forth after the catastrophic failure is the only methodology that fundamentally works, because otherwise it could take you weeks or months to get it back. So that's an important asset to look at. Security concerns will continue to move, and you know, we really don't need to talk about that much beyond the fact that it's just a natural concern for some IT and business leaders to be concerned about moving data anywhere outside of their control. So here, just be sensitive to the importance of SSAC 16 and SOC certification at the cloud. Those are physical and financial certifications within the facility itself, employee certifications to ensure that all that security is in place. SOC 2 is the preferable method. Ensure you encrypt your data in flight and at rest using a high-grade encryption methodology. Something like AES 256-bit encryption is the preferred method. Ensure you're incorporating those types of solutions into the security architecture, and you'll see more and more of that become prevalent in 2016. So DR will continue to evolve as business demands evolve. We'll see convergence of things like backup, archive, and disaster recovery, business continuity, really fuel the modernization of what used to be just backup in 2016. And what I mean there is that solutions that just maybe backed up or replicated one type of operating system, like a physical or a virtual, and then you had to add another solution for archive. You had to add another solution for disaster recovery. You had to add another solution to manage the cloud. That's converging into a singular architecture that's managed by a single pane of glass to reduce your management costs, your management time, your management overhead, your training cost, and so forth, as well as taking a single data set, so you don't have 3 or 4 or 5 different data sets, but a single data set that now can be local backup and recovery, instant recovery, bare metal recovery for really fast recovery on site in the event of a server failure or a file loss or what have you, and replicate it, same data archived and replicate it to the cloud for business continuity and long-term archive, all managed by a single pane of glass. And there'll be a move in 2016 from just pure data protection to services and workload availability. And this really is the dynamic nature of cloud resources itself, and the mobility of data is allowing companies to now use the resources that are in the cloud. This combined with the expectation that we have 24/7 access to critical applications like e-commerce or websites or email or what have you. Those expectations are there, and that we can access it from anywhere. So that we need to be able to have the ability to continue those services, and those services incorporate more than just backup of data. They incorporate an application, and in many, many instances, most instances actually, that application is a complex application. It incorporates multiple dependencies, meaning that there's a dependency of a DNS server or an Active Directory, databases, web front ends, or whatever to that particular application. They all need to work together. All the data sets need to be in sync, and they need to spin up in the right order. And that's what workload availability is about, and that's where the industry is moving. Disaster recovery as a service will continue to grow. That goes along with the previous statement that I really talked about. It really will be the game changer in 2016. More and more companies will look to the cloud as being their disaster recovery and business continuity solution. But along with that, recovery time objectives, that's how quick you need to get your application back up and operational, and recovery point objectives, the amount of data that you can afford to lose, for mission-critical applications is shrinking. Companies need to get them up faster, right? That 24/7 expectation, that loss of data, that loss of customer reputation, what have you, is becoming more and more and more critical. And the cloud disaster recovery and things like being able to assure that recovery and test it automatically in the cloud are becoming dominant. And that really points to the next growth area or the next trend, and that's the demand for automated testing and validation of your cloud backup and DR. And this will continue to grow. Manual tests are just too expensive and too infrequent. You know, many companies that have DR in a secondary site or even in the cloud today are only testing once a year, and they're finding that their data sets have changed so drastically or they're no longer in sync that recovery doesn't work any longer. So what's happening is we're moving towards a recovery assurance where you can automate testing, you can validate the RTOs and RPOs and ensure that those interdependent applications spin up in the right order and test it on a monthly basis so that you can ensure that it will recover when you need it to recover. And then lastly, compliance concerns will continue to become more critical, right? Compliance regulations are requiring that reliable business continuity plans be in place, be audited, and be certified. So in 2016, DR and assurance of recovery, that automated testing, that certification, that auditing of that test and validation of the test, and that you can spin up and get this application back at the service level agreement that your compliance requires will be dominant. And that will really drive what is DRAS and the automated testing and certification of those devices. So the first step really in disaster recovery, as you look at disaster recovery and disaster recovery preparation, we can't look at a checklist of how good our plan is until we really assess the impact of what downtime is. It's really imperative to understand that what that effect of downtime cost is to a business, and it's changing. Again, you know, as we grow in years, if you look 5 or 10 years ago, we didn't have immediate access to things. We didn't have e-commerce. We didn't have, you know, the type of mobile devices that we have today that access data anywhere at any time. That's changed, and it's drastically changing year by year. So it's becoming more and more important. So it's important as part of your checklist and your evaluation to reassess what you think your downtime costs are, and this will help validate your solution, right? What solution will you implement? Do you need to implement disaster recovery in the cloud? Do you need to implement business continuity in the cloud? And fortunately, those costs are becoming, you know, much more presentable to the companies. They're more reasonable. They're OpEx-oriented type cost factors that many more companies, no matter what the size, can now implement those solutions and keep their operations going. So understanding the cost will help validate the purchase of those additional services that are required to keep your business up and going. This chart, and you'll get a copy of it, and again, the white paper will go into it in a little bit more significant detail, includes both direct productivity and indirect costs, like damage to reputation, loss of customer opportunity, damage to your company brand. Those are all things that really need to be incorporated into this cost of downtime calculation. And analysts have used these calculations for years, and they're fundamentally in agreement, maybe not exactly on what the exact cost is, but they're close. And if you look across Gartner and IDC and Forrester and many others, not intentionally leaving anybody out, but they fundamentally assess that the cost of downtime is between $90,000 and $300,000 for every hour of IT system downtime. Pretty significant. Now, that's when you take all of these factors into account, not just the cost of replacing the server, right, but all the other factors that are on this particular chart. And that cost of downtime will be significantly higher for financial institutions, telecommunications, hospitals, some manufacturing, and so forth. But those people that have much larger organizations and much higher needs for immediacy to data. So with that said, taking that first assessment and really understanding what our cost factors are, let's look at a site checklist for 2016. Let's look at what do we need to tune up maybe based on the trends that we just looked at, based on doing a true downtime cost analysis. Let's look at that checklist because, if you look, as I said just a couple of years ago, a disaster really isn't what it used to be, or at least what we as business people assessed a disaster. In the past, we would define a disaster as an act of nature, right? It's a hurricane, it's a tornado, it's a fire that ravages the building and wipes out the company and our ability to conduct business, right? And the chance of natural disasters like that are relatively small, right? If you look at, and I have a number of white papers out on our site that you can go back and reference that look at what the primary cause of downtime is, and the primary cause is really hardware failure, power failures, things that can happen that are on plan that happen on a more regular basis, right? And today, when we look at worldwide networks, web applications, 24/7 call centers, e-commerce, and other applications, even a common hardware failure or a common electrical failure can spell significant disaster. So it literally brings our communications, online transactions and things like that to a screeching halt. So business continuity, needs to be understood, not only in cost of downtime, but what type of continuity do we need to put in place in order to continue our critical business applications so that we don't have those significant costs to downtime. So let's take a look at what types of things we need to do in 2016 to stay on the right path. The first and most important step in disaster recovery planning is to understand how unplanned outages can affect our organizations, our companies, our businesses. Without the ability to determine the impact of what an unplanned outage is in some meaningful way, it really becomes super difficult to determine the type of disaster recovery strategy that we need to put in place going forward. So the first thing to do is evaluate our environment and do a risk analysis. And what that risk analysis incorporates, and again, I get into a little bit more detail in the white paper itself, but the first steps are to rank your services, your IT applications. Do you have e-commerce, email, what critical ERP applications that need to be up and operational? What applications are in use? What's your company's tolerance to downtime? Is it an hour? Is it a half a day? Is it 24 hours? Is it a week, right? I mean, figure it out and do that on an application by application basis, because it will vary based on the criticality of that particular application. And that will ascertain exactly what your recovery time objective is. So now you'll have an associated recovery time objective with each of your applications, the first start. The second is to understand what's the acceptable loss, data loss. How much data can we lose on an application by application basis, and that will determine what the recovery point objective is. So at this stage of a risk analysis, we understand our downtime cost, we understand our tolerance on an application by application basis of how quickly we need to get it back online. We understand how much data we can afford to lose in each one of those applications. And what that determines here, what the RPO, or recovery point objective, determines is how quickly do we need to back up or protect or take a snapshot of each of those critical applications, right? If we can only afford to lose 15 minutes of data because it's an e-commerce application, we need to take a snapshot of that every 15 minutes, right? And that will determine and replicate that immediately to the disaster recovery and business continuity site. In the event that that e-commerce site goes down, you can DNS and move and do a secure VPN over to the secondary cloud, your disaster recovery as a service, and continue operation on that site in a relatively quick time. These factors will determine how quick and how soon and what you need to put over there. So the next step is to rank the risk. I mean, what are your potential failures, right? Are you in Hurricane Alley, Tornado Alley? Or do you live in Florida where, potential hurricanes, or I'm in North Carolina. I think we have more hurricanes in Florida. I've lived in Florida and North Carolina, surprisingly. More of them seem to target us than when I lived in Florida, but maybe it's just targeting me. It's a side note. Anyway, so what are the on-plan failures, right? Do you have bad power? Are there floods? Are your servers not secure? Do you have potential of software errors in doing software updates, viruses? I mean, all of those types of things need to be kind of categorized in those on-plan failures, because they can all take your systems down. Then there's those natural disasters. That'll be lower on the list because they don't happen as often, quite frankly. You have a hardware failure, you have a drive failure, you have a virus, you have corruption, you have somebody that intentionally deletes files in your company. Unfortunately today that's more prevalent than it used to be. And then there's compliance requirements. What are those regulatory and compliance requirements? How much data do we have to have retained long-term, right? In the health industry, it could be the life of the patient plus 2 years, right? In other industries, it's 7 or 20 years. So you have to retain data records to meet compliance, SOX requirements, HIPAA requirements, and so forth. So what are those requirements, and how are we going to do long-term retention, and how are we going to audit and prove that we can get that data back for the compliance auditors by being able to spin it up in the cloud and run real-time audit reports on it as required. And then lastly, it's looking at what the recovery options are. I mean, what can we do to recover? What the cost factors of those are. We're really associating and putting a disaster recovery per each of those risks. If you do this risk analysis, it'll really set you up and position you extremely well to take a look at the plan and assess the plan. So what are the things that we need to do or update or review in our disaster recovery plans for 2016? Just a lot of this, frankly, you folks are probably doing some of this stuff or all of this stuff. It may be redundant for you, but it's a good assessment of really being prepared to recover our data and meet those expectations that our employees, customers, and quite frankly, our bosses have, that they can get back to their data and their applications in a timely manner. The first is sounds relatively mundane, right? It should be that we're doing this on a regular basis, but it's really taking an inventory of your backup. I mean, the problem is today that many backups aren't completing because the backup windows aren't long enough, and the amount of data is growing at an abundant and unabated rate, as I said previously. So do an inventory. Are your backups completing? Have they completed? Do you have retention, the appropriate retention? So do all those things. Really do an inventory of, do you have schedules, automated schedules for all of the systems that are in your infrastructure, in your environment, whether they be remote offices or whether they be multiple data centers or whether they be physical or virtual? Do you have automated schedules and backup jobs in place to ensure that you can cover everything that was there last year and has been added since the last time that you did an inventory? The next, it really goes back to the risk assessment, right? Which applications are essential to keeping the business operations running, right? This is really assigning those RTOs, RPOs, recovery time objective. How quick do you need to get the application or the data back? And you need to look at both, right? Because if you have a primary site failure, just having your data located in a cloud somewhere or at a secondary site doesn't really provide you very quick recovery time objectives. It's really about recovering the application, right? Without the application, the data, I won't say is worthless. It's not. It's obviously not worthless. It's very critical, but it needs the application in order to spin up. So you need to have recovery time objectives on an application-by-application basis that's associated with the data and is in sync with that particular data, right? And that data being backed up, snapshot, protected on a recovery point objective. How often do you need to do that in order to get that data back on a regular basis? The other is one that we may not be doing consistently, and that's reviewing our application interdependencies. How often, what are the dependencies between applications? As we move to more and more virtualization, this is becoming more and more applicable, right? In our physical environment, we had usually an all-encompassing environment, not totally. That changed over the years too. But in a virtualization environment, it's very prevalent that you'll have an application that's dependent on a database, on a web front end, on, as I said, DNS, on Active Directory and other features and functions, other services, and they all need to be synced. They all need to spin up in the right order. The data sets all need to be within the same RPOs to ensure that that application is refreshed and can come back online in the right order. So that orchestration of those interdependencies of all those other services needs to be done. This is what, when I talked about moving to workload application protection, the recovery assurance, the ability to orchestrate those applications, ensure all the data is in sync, automate the test of all of that on whatever basis that you need to meet your compliance and audit requirements. Those types of things are now coming into play. So that, as we talked about, review and or define those RTO and RPOs. Evaluate your bandwidth requirements. Make sure that you can get your data over there. Ensure that you're using good global deduplication. That your security is in flight and at rest on the cloud is good. AES 256. Include the compliance requirements, again, SOX, HIPAA, and others. What compliance requirements, regulatory requirements are you under? How quick do you have to get improve to auditors that you can get your systems back up and operational, and how long do you need to retain your data? Make sure that you have a good data retention cloud solution that follows a procedure of not retaining all the data, but retaining it in a, a typical type of grandfather, father, son, multiple weeks, 12 months, and indefinite year type of application, so that you're not just copying every backup to the cloud and just growing the thing infinitum and putting yourself into a cost position that's out of control. A true archive long-term data retention that follows that type of grandfather, father, son schema will reduce those costs and keep them reasonable. And then test. Test regularly. Make sure that everything is in sync as I spoke to. So how do we stay on course, and how do we reduce costs? Or as we move into 2016, applications continue to increase in complexity and variety, as I spoke to. Some of which are more critical to the operation than others. Right. So as such, it really becomes very increasingly important that the business get a clear understanding of how failure or one or all of these applications will affect the business. So those are things like backup and recovery, long-term retention, disaster recovery alternatives. Those are the things that we need to look at and stay on course and implement it in that converged method that I talked about in the 2016 trends, where it's all encompassing into a single solution managed by a single pane of glass that reduces the cost. So what are the key priorities for doing that? It's integrating a deduplication and optimized bandwidth that I've talked about. I've really spoken to this, and I'm not going to go into detail to ensure that we have some time. And again, this is in the paper in great detail. I'll talk about in the next slide, eliminating point backups, converging backup archive, disaster recovery for compliance and regulatory requirements in a cloud is really the trend of where things are going 2016 and beyond. So doing that keeps costs down, actually. It's all integrated into one solution. Now you don't have to manage multiple applications and have more than one data set. It's all consolidated onto a single data set, and that reduces your storage cost, it reduces your long-term retention costs, and it speeds up recovery. Implement a hybrid cloud architecture, and that's an architecture that incorporates all the things that I spoke about on-premise for fast local recovery, fast recovery from local archives, so retain some point of archive locally as well as within the cloud. So you have on-premise and you have the cloud, and within the cloud you have long-term retention, you have disaster recovery, and you have business continuity, all managed, all integrated into a single pane of glass, single management from a single vendor that provides the one point of support. It significantly reduces costs. We talked about single pane of management. And then prioritize your disaster recovery towards applications, not just data. That ultimately will reduce your downtime cost, and it'll keep everything else continuing to operate and stay in tune. And we'll look at some of these things. When I talk about eliminating point products, this is kind of an explosive view of what could be a typical enterprise, where you have virtual backup and management, you have physical assets, right? Your ERP applications and certain mission critical applications are still running on physical servers because they need more performance, or they just haven't been virtualized yet, or they just need the assets of a physical environment. You have mission critical applications, as the ERP, the databases, the SAP type applications, the e-commerce and so forth. And then you have storage, and storage spread across NAS and SAN and direct attach, and additionally to cloud. So it's becoming more complex that data is exploding because it's growing across all these point products. We need to consolidate it, pull it together, incorporate an application that manages all of these things, provides data protection and recovery for all of these environments, no matter what it happens to be, and incorporates the cloud for long-term recovery and compliance reasons. So for compliance and regulatory requirements, backup copies, right? So what a backup copy used to be, the industry is now calling archive and replication, kind of the combination of archive and replication, a backup copy. We changed the names of things to protect the innocent or the uninnocent, I'm not certain. But anyway, that's the new terminology that's going forward. I'm certain many have heard that. And it's really imperative that you have that archive or that backup copy, both local on-premise, maybe 30 days or 60 days or 90 days in either a disk or a removable disk or tape or some mechanism that's secondary to your primary storage, as well as equivalent backup copies of that on the cloud. So you have two locations, multiple media types, and the reason for that is so that you can recover quickly in the event that you have a file loss or you have software corruption or a virus, again, typically, or somebody's deleted files. And that's also been deleted into the recent backup that you've done. You can roll back to what your archive is and recover that very, very quickly. You also need the ability to have that long-term retention in the cloud because that's a lower cost mechanism. It reduces the storage growth at your primary site, and it allows you to retain it for long periods of time. So that helps in your RTOs and your RPOs. So if you look at a hybrid cloud architecture, this is a quick architectural image of what a hybrid cloud would look like, and that's the ability to back up, have a single point solution that provides backup of all of your assets, whether they be physical or virtual or any other application. Provides integrated deduplication, provides integrated replication, provides integrated encryption so that your data is encrypted in flight. It provides the ability to protect, to have local archive and the importance of that for software corruption and so forth, the ability to spin back, supports that locally, as well as it supports it in the cloud. It supports both disaster recovery as a service in the cloud and the ability to test those automatically, those critical applications automatically, as well as it provides long-term retention, all managed by a single pane of glass. In addition, it provides the ability to support the hyperscale clouds, the public clouds as well, the Amazons, the Googles, for backup storage and archive as well, so that you can have yet another copy of that or what's called a cold copy. It's all managed, all integrated, all provided in a single solution, and that's really the direction of where you're seeing the industry going today. So the other thing we talked about, prioritizing DR applications, and again, I think we've spoken fairly quickly to this, at least given it an overview. And this is the ability to simplify the process through automated testing, through orchestration of those interdependencies to make sure everything is spinning up in the right order, that has the right boot order, that it has the latest sync of data, so that your RPOs and your RTOs are certified, validated, to meet whatever your requirements happen to be. And once they're tested, they're retained as a validated backup. So no longer are you worried about backup inventory of are your backups completing? Have they gotten to your DR site? Are they valid? Can we really spin up? A lot of people don't find out. A lot of companies don't find out until they try to go and get that data or spin that data up in the cloud, and they find out that it's not valid data, or it's been deleted, or it's corrupted in some manner. Really prioritizing your DR to the application will eliminate those issues. So real briefly here, as we roll the time, because I want to leave the next 10 minutes for questions. Unitrends has been in business since 1979. We've been around. We really understand the industry. Well over 14,000 customers worldwide. We're headquartered in Boston. We're a data protection and recovery company. We focus on recovery. How do you get your data back and integrate the cloud into that hybrid cloud architecture that I just briefly showed you? Our cloud architecture is a storage disaster recovery solution cloud that provides either a replicated backup copy or an infinite data retention solution based on the grandfather, father, son architecture that I've mentioned. We support VMware Hyper-V as well as physical virtual Windows spin up in the cloud itself. So no matter what your application happens to be, we can spin that up in the cloud, continue operation in the cloud, secure VPN your customers and your employees to those applications, and continue business as long as your primary site is down, or you have an outage, or you're doing maintenance at your primary site. We also integrate application automated recovery assurance and orchestration into that cloud. So I encourage you, one, to read the white paper that you'll get a copy of, and they go through a lot more detail. I went through a lot of information here, and I appreciate your time and your attention to that. As I said in the beginning, it's difficult to do it much justice, and the white paper will explain a lot more than I've had the opportunity to do here in the last 50 minutes. I also encourage you to go to our website. There's a lot, and there's other white papers that talk about recovery, that talk about the cloud. You can get information on the product solutions that we have. You can register for Unitrends free, which is a free solution. It's free, and have an opportunity to get your questions answered by real experts, and we actually will give you $50 for 15 minutes. If you have questions, take advantage of this. It's a great way to get a gift card and get your questions answered. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Katie for Q&A. I encourage you to join us for part 2 of this seminar series on February 18th, where I'll really delve into some of the backup and recovery tool sets that you need to meet the goals that you're setting for 2016. Thanks, Katie. Go ahead.
All right, folks, so we have a couple of questions already in the queue. If you are looking for how to ask us a question, just look for the icon with a question mark near the drop-down menu near the middle top of your screen if you have that view, or from the upper right-hand corner if you have that view. Let's dive right into these first couple of questions. This first one's coming in today from David, and David says, if I'm evaluating using a public cloud like AWS or Google for disaster recovery, what do I need to look for to be aware in a total solution?
You know, David, it's good. That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. I'm glad you're thinking about it first, right? That those hyperscale clouds, those public clouds today, as I spoke a little bit about this earlier on, look on the surface to have really low costs per gigabyte of storage, and it's true, they do. But it's important to evaluate things like the network egress fees. How much is it going to cost you to get your data there to begin with, and then access that data in the event that you need to do it? There could be data retrieval costs, or there are costs associated with getting your data back. If you're storing your data for long-term retention and archive, the methodology today in the hyperscale cloud is just additional redundant copies of whatever backup data that you happen to send to to the cloud. So it will continue to grow and expand over time, and you could be very surprised in 4 or 5 years from now that if you have a 7 or 10 year retention policy, that your storage has grown abundantly in the cloud, and that initial low cost that you started out with isn't so low cost anymore. So it compounds over time, and that's important to look at. And again, it's not me talking poorly about hyperscale clouds, because we partner with them, we support them, they're integrated into our hybrid cloud architecture. It's just important to understand which cloud, do your homework, which cloud is best suited for the type of solution that you're looking to implement. And then the last factors are service level agreements. How quick do you need to recover your data? Can you support disaster recovery within the cloud itself? And it's starting within those hyperscale public clouds where disaster recovery as a service is beginning to gain some ground. The primary difficulty, again, is migrating the application from whatever operating system you happen to have in your environment, VMware, Hyper-V, Windows Physical, what have you, to the cloud APIs, and that migration is not so transparent depending on what you're using and who you're working with. So be aware of that, and be aware of getting that data back in the event that you have a primary failure at your site. That data from the hyperscale cloud today is typically going to come back across the land, and if it's terabytes of data, that could take weeks or months to repopulate your site. Okay?
All right, our next question is coming in from Kumaran. And Kumaran says, do you provide on-site hybrid backup solutions?
On-site hybrid backup solutions.
This is asking if we provide solutions that they can use both on-site as well as replicating to the cloud.
Replicating to the cloud. Absolutely. And the architecture, and I went through it pretty quickly, and I apologize, guys, for that. You'll get a copy of the slides so you can review it in more detail. And again, it's detailed in the white paper. Yes, our architecture is a hybrid cloud architecture, meaning that we provide on-premise data protection, instant recovery, as well as backup copies, or what used to be called archives, so that you can roll back in the event of a virus or software corruption or deletion of data. All that on site, as well as real-time replication. The data is automatically replicated. So when it's backed up, the schedule includes replication to the cloud, so that data is resident within the cloud. And then within the cloud itself, we provide long-term data retention to ensure that data is there for long periods of time. It doesn't compound in storage growth as I described in hyperscale clouds. We provide disaster recovery as a service so that you can spin that data up in the cloud and continue operation in the event that you have an outage. And then for applications, we orchestrate those interdependencies and test those automatically to ensure that you can recover those as well. I hope that gave some clarification.
All right, our next question is coming from Sherry, and Sherry says, what is the recommended bandwidth for cloud backup?
Yeah, I mean, recommended bandwidth is a function of the amount of data that you're sending to the cloud. And there's a number of bandwidth calculators that are on the website, so you can take a look at that based on what you calculate, and our systems engineers can help you calculate the amount of data. Because what we're sending, and this is the point of deduplication, compression, and WAN acceleration, to ensure that you're minimizing the amount of data that you're sending to the cloud, so that you're only sending the delta differences, if you will, compressed delta differences. And once you understand that, based on the amount of change data that you have in your applications, then you can determine on a daily basis or every hour that you're sending a gigabyte or 10 gigabytes or 20 gigabytes of data across the network. Put them into that calculator, and it'll tell you whether you can get away with an internet line, a T1 line, T3, or whether you need to go to an OC3 or something larger.
All right, we have 2 more questions. Questions coming in from Rich, and Rich says, what are some of the considerations for current customers, i.e. implementing bandwidth or fiber from our local site to your Forever Cloud from existing Unitrends boxes on site?
Yeah, I'll answer that question generically. It's a great question, and ensure that you talk to your systems engineer to evaluate and look at your specific environment. Since I'm not there, I don't have eyeballs on your specific environment. But we can definitely support, a dark fiber environment to the cloud, a fiber environment to the cloud. We don't dictate what the WAN infrastructure is between the cloud and the on-premise facility. So whatever that happens to be, we'll support the data transfer across that particular WAN bandwidth and interface to it via our on-premise backup and protection devices, as well as the cloud on the other side. It was kind of a generic answer, but again, you can contact me. My email's right there, and I'll make sure that you get in contact with your systems engineer and our architects, and they'll take a look and make sure that all the right pieces are in play.
All right, and then looks like this is going to be the final question we have time for today. If we don't answer your question live on the session, we will follow up with you after today's session. This question is coming in from Ryan, and Ryan says, do you recommend grabbing multiple data sets or master backups every year?
Multiple data sets for master backups?
Or.
Oh, 4 master backups.
Or.
Yeah.
Either or, not 4, either or.
I'm sorry, Katie.
That's all right.
Yeah. We provide different backup methodologies. We'll do an incremental forever, differentials, obviously fulls, and part of our incremental forever is doing a synthetic, right? So it's a synthetic full, so it will automatically create a full backup or a master on a regular basis. So there's not a necessity to do full backups. You can do incrementals forever and synthetics. So that would most likely be the preferred method to reduce the amount of time that it takes to do those backups. If you felt that you needed to, you could clearly schedule full backups as well. Okay,
well, that was the last question that we had time for today. And we did want to go ahead and announce the winner of our $100 gift card. Mike, you choose a number between 100 and 64.
How about 126?
All right, let me look and see who that is. It looks like David R. from South Carolina. You are, that's the number you logged in with, and so you are today's winner of a $100 Amazon gift card. We will follow up with you after today's session so you can learn how you'll receive that. Again, we want to thank everybody for your time and interest in Unitrends and for all the great questions today. We do look forward to following up with each and every one of you here over the next few days, and look forward to seeing you on our next session on Thursday, February the 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.